Ladies and gentlemen, it is October 10th, 2025, and I am David Kendrick, owner of Lion Speaking Agency and your favorite Purple Heart veteran. What we're going to be talking about today is a blog that I have on my blog, a blog post that I have on my blog with Psychology Today. It is called my experience with foggy PTSD brain. And Psychology Today is one of the largest online mental health magazines out there, and I happen to be one of the guests on this website that has a blog, and it is called The Veterans Corner by David Kendrick Jr. And what I'm going to talk about in this video is my experience with what I call foggy PTSD brain, what it is. But first, I want to qualify myself about why I should be talking to you about this and why you should be listening to me about this. So I joined the Army as a Cavalry Scout in 2005, and we deployed to Iraq in 2006 during the troop surge when the war was at its height. And during this time, it was heavy combat, heavy fighting, and I got shot by a sniper, and we experienced these new type of IEDs called EFPs. And these EFPs were cutting through our Humvees like butter during this time. The reason we had the troop surge is because we were literally getting slaughtered in Iraq, and President Bush, wanted to send more fighting forces in there to counter the terrorism that we were facing at this time. So in this unit, during my deployment, man, we lost a lot of guys. I got shot by a sniper. My best friend, Eric Snell, was shot and killed by a sniper. And we lost a lot of people at the same time to these EFPs. They were taking out multiple people at the same time. Now let's talk about my experience with PTSD and the foggy PTSD brain. When I'm driving down the street, sometimes when I cross an intersection and it's wide open, I almost hit my brakes and stop because I'm afraid of something going wrong, something blowing up, right? When I'm driving down the street sometimes and I see an abandoned car on the side of the road, I slow down. Or if I'm driving and I see it a couple of feet ahead, I'll try to get in the next lane over. Why? Because in Iraq, I saw my good friend get blown up twice, and in my unit, we lost guys to these EFPs. And I can't help it. Seeing my friend get blown up and then losing guys in my troop, I was in Bravo Troop 361 Cav, losing guys to EFPs, and my experience with being a lead driver in Iraq, it put these like stamps on my brain, and I can't explain it. That's why in the comments I love to talk to people and I love to research the brain and find out how trauma leaves these like imprints, these little dents in our brain, and they modify our behavior moving forward. So I drove as lead driver in Iraq, and lead driver, you always are the first one to get hit with an IED. And there were times in Iraq that I used to clench up and basically literally kiss my ass goodbye because the bombs were planted so good in Iraq, you don't know they're there until it's too late, right? So there would be times here, I'm driving down the road and it's like I'm kissing my ass goodbye because I'm thinking that this car is going to explode. Or if I'm going down an intersection and even if there's no traffic, if I don't see anybody on that road, my mind is, what's going on here? Let me slow down, observe the scene, and make sure that there's nothing going on, even though I know I'm here, right, in America. And that's when the brain starts to get foggy a little bit. And let me talk about what I have to do if this gets really bad, like it did when I was fresh out of Iraq. I would have to ground myself. When I was stationed in Colorado Springs, Fort Carson. When I was in Colorado and this would happen, I would have to ground myself. Okay, you're not on Route Victory or Route Anaconda, or you're not in Slaughter City. You're not in your lead truck anymore. You're not in your Humvee. Where are you? You're in Colorado Springs. You're driving down Academy Boulevard. The date is whatever the date was. You're not in Iraq. You're not in Iraq. Keep driving forward. There aren't any IEDs on the road. And why I would have to do this is because those incidents that I had were so traumatic. Like I said, it left these imprints on the brain, and then I guess when you're closer, when the trauma is recent, when it just happened, you're conditioned to think that it's going to happen again, or like it's more likely to happen the closer you are. Well, the closer that traumatic event happened. This happened. I was in Iraq, man. I was 20 years old. I'm 18 years ago. But I still have these thoughts sometimes when I would have to ground myself. Now, because it's 18 years later, those thoughts and those impulses, they aren't as impactful, they aren't as large as they were when I was fresh out of Iraq and I got in the car behind the wheel for the first time. Back then, I would have to pull over and ground myself. Now that I'm much older and that traumatic experiences, war is years, almost 2 decades behind me, I don't have to ground myself for as long anymore. You know what I'm saying? So now I can, hey, you're driving down Peachtree, you in Atlanta, this is the date. But for some soldiers, that foggy, that when things get foggy, you can't ground yourself, and it's hard to determine where you are. Because I've been there, it's really, really hard to determine. You can be driving down the street and see an accident, and boom, your brain goes right back there. Your mind goes right back there. And things start to get a little bit foggy. And that leads into other symptoms of PTSD because, like I say in some of my videos, not everybody wants to remember combat because it's their most traumatic experience in their life. For me, I loved it because I was with my friends. All of my friends were still alive. And, it's something about the Army that you only get once in a lifetime. That's why I wrote this book, Calvary, to remember going to war and just being with my friends in the military. But what happens when that brain gets foggy? Let's say that you're one of the veterans who you can't ground yourself, and boom, you're right back in Iraq. And now for the next 2 weeks, you're having flashbacks. Now let's go down that rabbit hole. You're having flashbacks, which is going to lead to what? You want to change your reality. You're going to try to change your reality, which means you're going to start drinking, using your substance of choice, unprotected sex. You're going to start wilding out because you want to get as far away from reality as you can because you don't know how to ground yourself. And because it's now that fog, you're stuck in the fog. And you can't find your way out. You're fighting, you're touching, you're feeling, trying to find your way out. I think our flashlights are called surefires. You may have your surefire, your flashlight trying to find your way out, but everywhere you look, you're surrounded by fog and you can't distinguish what's real and what's not. This happened to me as well when it comes to my injury getting shot by a sniper. For a long time, I couldn't handle being around balloons. Why? Because balloons would pop. I'm one of them people now that have a phobia of balloons because balloons popping is like one of the sounds that mimics the shot of the sniper rifle the most. Because the day I got shot, that loud crack of that sniper's rifle was the most distinct memory that I have from it. Because when I got shot, I heard "Kah!" and then I fell to the ground and I blacked out. And I woke up later when I was on the ground bleeding. But I used to be at work, and of course, there's always going to be a birthday celebration. Everybody's going to have balloons and things like that. And balloons popped one time, and I freaked out because it mimicked the sound of a sniper's rifle. And the thing about this is, it was a phobia that I didn't know I had until something reminded me of being in combat. And of course, being the only civilian or the only veteran in this office, I freaked out, I jumped up, I ran out the room, and then people were like, what the hell is wrong with David? What's wrong with him? And I didn't know how to explain what was going on, but then my mind was right back in Iraq. Right back in Iraq. And luckily, I went through these sessions called EMDR that I do have recorded and on YouTube, on my other YouTube page. But when I had to get out of that situation, like the way I would ground myself, I had to think about how likely is it that in this corporate office there's a sniper waiting to shoot me again. The chances of that, 0%. Less than 0%. But in here, in my mind, because that was the most traumatic experience that happened to me, it was going to happen again. In reality, the chances of that happening, 0. But in my mind, it's like your check engine light, or it's like all the lights on your dashboard going off, just flashing. Emergency, emergency, sniper, danger, danger. And then what did I used to do? Go home, start calling out from work, drinking, isolating myself, becoming a hermit. Because once again, I'm thinking, my PTSD that I still kind of deal with to this day, but not as severe. Man, that sniper didn't shoot to kill me because he wanted to wait until I'm on top of the world and then come finish the job. That was my PTSD. But I'm going to get into one of the resources that I use, that I talked about on my Psychology Today blog, because what I love about my story and giving my keynotes on stage, I have the lived experience. But I love talking to professionals who study the brain and who can kind of diagnose what I'm going through. And then why I also love doing what I do is because I get to talk to other veterans who deployed to Afghanistan, who deployed to Iraq, or the family members of those veterans who have this foggy PTSD brain. I get to help them by telling my story a little bit and giving some of my tips and tricks and techniques about what I do. So don't let the dress fool you. When I get on stage, I do my thing. Okay, I'm a very professional. I just make this professional speaking thing look good. But anyway, let me get into my resource that I use on my blog. Andrew Morris wrote a book in 2016 called Why Icebergs Float, exploring science in everyday life. And I love to study the brain. So in this book, Andrew writes, it is now understood that the right hemisphere is involved in spatial tasks and with emotions such as empathy, humor, and depression, while the left is more dominant in verbal tasks such as speaking and writing for scientific and mathematical skills. So my right hemisphere of my brain, when it was in the fog, shut down. There was no humor. There was no depression. There was no humor. There was no empathy. It was all depression. And I mentioned this in another video. It was really, really hard for me to date because when I would get in one of these fogs, when I couldn't tell what was real and what was not, I didn't have any love for anybody, not even toward myself. And then that's when a lot of us as veterans, we engage in that self-destructive behavior. We drink and drive. We have unprotected sex. We go into bars. We get into fights. We isolate ourselves. And then we become the IED that we were trying to dodge in Iraq. And when we explode, it be the people, places, and things closest to us that always get the shrapnel. The people are going to be our family members, our caregivers. The places are going to be our jobs, and the things are our employment. And then we have to go to AER, Army Emergency Relief, and try to get a loan because we don't snap that somebody at work and ended up getting fired because we're in that fog and we explode. That's what I have for you right now. Just a small little talk. If you want to hear more, you're going to have to hire me for a keynote speech, baby. Or if you want to hear about my time with my friends and the traumatic events that I went through that I help other veterans with today, you can get my book, Calvary. It is on Amazon. It would be a perfect Veterans Day gift for your loved veteran. And if you want to know more about me and what I do and talk about a keynote speech for me and your organization, visit me at www.dkendrickjr.com. If you have any experience with the foggy PTSD brain, or if you know any veteran that does or has and now you're over it, leave me a comment down below or visit me at www.dkendrickjr.com. Once again, leave me a message and let's talk about me talking for you.